All right. Cool. We're on. Okay. So thanks everybody for tuning in. If you are listening to this, you probably are into some form of movement practice. And if you've reached any kind of level, you may have encountered somebody named Yuri Marmerstein, maybe through hand balancing or seen him through Juji Mufu's videos, if you know who that is. But I encountered him through a thing called Online Movement University, and he did a unit on hand balancing. And I really liked the way that he taught. He broke down things that were out of my comfort zone, but he also had some interesting thoughts around something in the fitness world and movement world, anything related to the physical culture, body kind of movement stuff. And it's the topic of self-righteousness. But before we get into that, I wanted to introduce him and let him talk about himself. So, Yuri, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh yeah, I'm still kind of figuring out what to say for my own. But I'm based out of Las Vegas. I'm an acrobat. I don't really like titles, but that's like the closest thing. So I do a bit of everything. I teach mainly handstands and acrobatics. But what I'm trying to teach is not necessarily those skills, but how to use the lessons learned from them just towards building a greater perspective and body awareness. So I teach workshops around the world. I do some training here in Vegas. I'm trying actually to travel less in the future. So Vegas, it would be a better place to find me. But yeah, and I come from a self-taught background originally. So when I started, I just, there was stuff that I thought was cool. I had no idea how to do it, how to approach it. I just tried. I tried and failed for many years. I built a lot of bad habits. And what I found was that while it stunted my own development as a practitioner, when I started teaching, it gave me a different kind of perspective of what it is to struggle and what it is to fail learning these skills. So I consider myself, I think I have more, I guess, experience and development in the teaching side of things than I do as a practitioner. But I'm trying to maintain a balance as much as I can.
And I appreciate you saying that too, because a lot of people who are coming into the world of movement are coming as adults or someone past the kid age where we're not afraid of things so much. So I remember in one of your posts you had mentioned something about being able to teach adults while dealing with their fear as adults, like especially acrobatics, right? Being upside down, flipping, those things are sort of intimidating.
They are. And
And
it's a very different learning process. And I go through that myself. So it's not like I'm done with it. I still have a lot of moves that I'm scared of, that I still go through that same thing. Like, okay, I have to psych myself out to do this. How do I trick myself? So and what ends up happening, and that's kind of what I saw a lot of when I first started teaching as well, is that most people who are teaching this stuff ended up learning it as kids, which is great as a practitioner because they can do it to such a high level. But the issue is that when learning as a child, you can bypass a lot of those fears, a lot of that conscious side of learning.
mm,
And again, it just becomes a different process. So it's not the same thing to teach a kid as to teach an adult. It's a different kind of patience. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but having only experience in one doesn't correlate 100% to the other.
and as I came as an adult to Olympic weightlifting, and I had no athletic background, and a lot of people who were teaching Olympic style weightlifting had been, they got their start as teenagers in that prime age where they're not afraid of anything, and
Yep.
so there was very little for adults in the way of they're very good athletes, but when it came to coaching, it was sort of like, whoa, there's nothing here. Have
It's
you
a different
experienced that?
process. Yeah, it's a different process and it's almost a different language. And it's like, I mean, to some degree, like why you bring up the virgin sex therapist, you have to have some experience in what you do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you're the top level athlete or you've only worked for yourself, right? And teaching isn't about working for yourself. Teaching is about knowing what works for others. So then you have to ask this question am I doing a performance? Are people watching me perform? Or am I teaching them how to do it? Which is, it's its own performance, but it's a very different skill set. And yeah, that's what ends up happening is that people go straight from being an athlete and they say, oh yeah, I can teach now because I can do this. How hard can teaching be? And teaching is, I'm still learning every day more about teaching. And it's like this idea that everything that I think is basic, that's, for granted, that you don't have to explain, you're going to find a time that somebody can't do it and you have to explain it. And then it's to the point that And that's why I think some of these high level athletes struggle so much as teachers, for a long time at least, is, I mean, imagine something that you can do without any conscious thought, like breathing or like walking.
Hmm.
Explain to me how to walk, one foot in front of the other, right? But it's more complicated than that. So let's say you were teaching, and I don't have experience with this, but let's say someone was in an accident and had a spinal cord injury and they were relearning how to walk. Does being able to walk really well make you qualified to teach someone who is recovering from a spinal injury how to relearn to walk? I don't know. Maybe that's a specific, different type of education.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're saying. Tell me a little bit about how you came into, like, what pulled you into movement initially that as an adult where you're like, I want to learn this, but there's not much out there for me.
Yeah, I wasn't too athletic as a child. I played like soccer and baseball, but I was, C team, like not very good, not anything to high level. But I'm still grateful for it because like even doing those different things as a kid, even though I didn't do gymnastics or anything, there's a lot of holes in being a gymnast as a kid as well. So I got into just kind of backyard martial arts, like Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
So then from there, of course, you watch Jackie Chan, and he's amazing. So wow, I want to do that. So I go in the backyard, I try some, kick some trees, I flail around, land on my back, and when I got into college, I started getting into capoeira because there was a guy who was basically, he was a part of the dance school, and he learned capoeira from Eddie Gordo, who is a video game character. So he had like an unofficial club, and I trained with him, and then I kept going. From there we got, and he did a bit of gymnastics as a kid as well, so he could do like some basic flips and tricks. And I kept going from there because I found capoeira really exciting and really interesting. That was like a lot of the stuff that I was into. And being socially awkward, of course, there was some psychology behind, oh, maybe if I learn to do these cool tricks, I won't have to rely on my social or conversational
Oh,
skills to make
same,
friends. Yeah.
same.
But continuing on with that, and what ended up happening that kind of jump started my teaching journey was the first year I trained with this guy who is a professional dancer somewhere now. I haven't really kept in touch. The second year of college, he ended up having some family issues and he went back home for that year. So basically, I was kind of left trying to put together the pieces of this unofficial club. And even though I wasn't prepared, I definitely wasn't at the skill level or the level of knowledge, but I wanted to keep it going. So I tried to take over the classes and I tried to keep this community going. And mainly it was for myself because I wanted to keep learning and I wanted to have other people to continue learning with. So it was like, basically just being put in a situation where I wanted to teach for myself just to keep this club and this movement appreciation going.
Oh, that's a fantastic origin story. That makes sort of like for a good teacher anyway, where somebody's sort of forced into a room where they have all these disparate pieces, and you're like, what do I build with this?
Yeah, and it's like I had no idea. So it was like, okay, let's, I remember he did this one drill with us, so let's try this drill. Let's see what happens. And then it became a lot of, and again, I was still very much learning my own stuff too for my own practice. So it was, yeah, just a lot of experimentation. But then you get used to this idea of, teaching is not just showing somebody something. It's not
Hmm.
just telling them to do it. There's a lot of communication in between. It can be. Sometimes just showing somebody something is enough, but if that's the only thing you can do as a teacher, you're limited. What if somebody's not a visual learner? What if they need
Mm.
to go further in depth than what you know how to break down? So it's a constant communication challenge, really.
Yeah. Did you find in your journey that when you had a question from a student there and you were like, I can't answer this, that kind of spurred you on to kind of find out who else is teaching this or how can I teach this?
Oh, absolutely. And I was trying to learn whatever I could. Like I was getting into flips and, I didn't know any gymnasts when I was in school. So every time I would meet like a gymnast, I was like, whoa. And I was probably too excited, because at that point they're retired as an athlete. Like they don't
Yeah.
care. But I'm like, whoa, I need to know everything. I want to know like, how do you do this skill? And what about this? And what about this? And this thought I had. And it was the same for hand balancing. It was the same for a lot of stuff because I didn't have I hadn't met a lot of people who could do it better than me. So every time that I did, I was probably too in their face, but I just wanted to learn more for myself, just understanding that perspective of someone who had been there and who had done it. And to some degree, I was also disappointed a lot of the time in that people that could do this stuff to such a high level, maybe I came across as too eager. Maybe they just didn't want to talk to me. But I found that they didn't understand the stuff to the level that I had thought they would, given that they did it, you know, at the level that they had. Like I remember, one girl who always talked about like, yeah, I was a level 10 gymnast and I did all these doubles and I did all this crazy stuff. And then she could like barely, and I understand she was retired for a bunch of years. Like I
Mhm.
understand a different perspective now, but she would barely do like basic stuff on floor and it was okay. And I was like, whoa, like you were a level 10 gymnast. I'm kind of disappointed. I didn't say that out loud, but like now looking back, that was a bit ignorant on my part because again, what did she go through to be an athlete? Maybe she had a bunch of injuries. Maybe there's a lot of emotional trauma that comes with
Mhm.
being a child athlete at a high level as well. Maybe she retired for a specific reason. So I know looking back on what I was thinking then, it wasn't the best response, but at the same time, like, yeah, I had some expectation of a higher level of understanding that wasn't there.
I've had I love that you mentioned that because there's definitely a psychological component to having gone through a system that's formalized versus the self-taught path, which is you want to just find as many people. I was the same way in weightlifting, very eager when I met anyone who was like flying barbells over their head.
Yeah.
And I would be like, so where did you learn this? And they would always cite some kind of master student relationship where nothing was questioned. And I would say, well, why do you guys do that? And they're like, I don't know. My coach just always told me from this. And I'm like, but, and the first encounter I had was with a Chinese coach who explained the why. Like they wanted things to look graceful and not just
Right.
explosive and grunty. And I was like, because he said it sells the sport rather than nobody wants to do hard work. He said everyone wants effortlessness. And I was like, thank you. That's just the first. And he was saying it in Chinese, and I actually don't speak Chinese. So, and then he had a translator, but I understand they actually care about the psychology, but also, like you said too, they do push people in a different way that is completely out of our culture, so.
It depends on so many things and like the systematic. And I coached gymnastics for a while as well at a competitive level. Nothing too crazy high level, but there is kind of a lot of that expectation with these sports where it is like they get trained like soldiers and they're specifically taught not to question and not to think for themselves, which if you know what you're doing, it might be better that way to produce a high level athlete because questioning can slow down the process.
Mm.
But then you have athletes who can do stuff so well and they have no idea what they're doing, which to some degree might be the highest level of being able to do that skill, of not having to think about it. But I know for me, it was more valuable, not so much that the kid could do the skill really well, but they understood enough about it to start to catch their own mistakes by themselves and understand why that was a mistake. To me, that was a much greater value than like, yeah, you took first place ribbon, fantastic.
And I'm glad you're talking about this because this sounds like the way, questioning slows down the progress, but in a way it sort of accelerates it for as an adult, like
Yeah.
to be able to sustain something. And I think that is sort of related to this self-righteousness problem that we see in the movement world because there's not a lot of people who volunteer to teach, the way that you're saying. There's a lot of
Yeah.
people who will put workshops on and say, look at this cool shit that I can do. And if you don't know how to do it, well, I'm the source. Does
This
that
is the
sound
way.
kind of, yeah, this is this is the way for anyone
This
who's
is the
watched The
way.
Mandalorian. But yeah, let's talk about that a little bit because I know you made that observation. I'm curious why that came up for you.
I think it's important, and I've been trying because I have a lot of potentially negative thoughts here, and I'm trying not to go in that direction. So I think it's just really important for as a teacher and as a student to understand why do people go to your workshop. And
Mm.
some people might go for the reason I want to watch this person that I know from the internet do cool shit. And there is nothing wrong with that as long as you're honest to yourself that that's why you're going. Like that has to make sense. Is why are you there? And then it's the same thing as this idea, like it can also sell, right? It can get people through the door. I can do cool shit, but hey, let's do the real shit. But then yeah, it's this idea, who are you teaching is the other thing. Like I took a lot of dance classes, and what I saw in take as a non-dancer I found I had a massive struggle because a lot of these teachers expect that they're teaching dancers. So they say like, okay, and one, two,
Mm.
three, four, five, six, seven, eight, and pas de bourrée, and turn, and tombe, coupe, jete, and go. And it's like, okay, this is like a whole nother language. And
Yes.
I understand you don't need to know all of that to do the skills, because it's like a baby doesn't need to learn grammar to start talking. But at the same time, is a baby going to learn to talk if you just read Dostoevsky at him without breaking down some of the stuff? So it's a balance between those two, and it's but that's what ends up happening. Is who is to blame then if the students don't get it? Is it the
Hmm.
teacher or is it the student? It could be a little bit of both, of course. I think it's the student's job to try to quell the ego, to try to, empty their cup, so to speak, and be open to learning. But at the same time, it's not always a conscious thing. And it's the teacher's job also to try to adjust their material to accommodate different learning styles and different learning curves and different backgrounds.
Yeah. And as you're saying, like knowing the why, like if it, like there's nothing wrong, because I think you do have to be able to show someone, hey, I can do this to a certain degree. But also, like, looking back at the fitness world, I don't know if that was ever the kind of root impetus of fitness or physical culture as we know it now in
Well,
America.
that's the issue too, is because I get a lot of these type of questions too, like, oh, what's your diet like? What's your workout schedule like? Well, like, do you want to be like me or do you want to be like yourself? Because I'll tell you, you'll never be like me, because we're not the same person. Not because I'm better than you, but it's like, even if you do all of the same things that I've done over the same amount of time, you still won't be like me, because you're just going to respond differently. And that's kind of what a lot of the fitness industry sells, is it's like, wow, if you do this, you can be just like me because I'm this perfect specimen.
Hmm.
But there's a lot more darkness, I guess, behind that.
I think that there is a lot of undiscussed darkness in, because people have to live with their body. I think at some point in your life, you're going to be challenged with the idea, like, what are you going to do with your body? Or you can continue to like medicate or find a way to distract, but everyone wants to do something with their body, whether it's a weird inversion or some kind of cool move or even graceful dance or Tai Chi. But as we're talking about this, there is a lot of master kind of like student, like if you it happens a lot in weightlifting where I'll give you this program 3x5 3x8 an exact recipe. It's like if I was like, Yuri, put these glasses on, and all of a sudden
Right.
you'll see the clear, and people just eat it up lock stock and whole barrel, like. And I'm like, they'll ask me like, Brandon, give me a program, and I'm like, I can't tell you that. That
Exactly.
would be out of my integrity. But there's so many people who are happy to be like, 250 a month, I'll tell you all you need to know.
And a lot of people like don't want to think for themselves, and it's a really hard thing to sell. Is this idea of, yeah, of actual independent thought as opposed to following? But some people want to follow, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think
Right.
to a degree, like if you're a complete beginner, you have no idea what to do. So yeah, okay, 3x5, that's good. But then you don't want to stay with it. That whole idea is you do that enough to learn something from it that you can adjust it, hopefully, based on yourself. But yeah, it's the same. And in martial arts, it's a lot of like, to me, it's, I understand both sides of it. On the one
Mm,
hand, you don't want to be randomly training with different teachers because they might all have techniques that work. But
mm,
if you start to mismatch all of these different techniques, it's not going to be effective. But on the other hand of that, the teachers are like, you can only train with me. This is the style. If you train with somebody else, don't bother coming back. Like
mm,
that kind of ownership. And to me, that's just insecurity. Like if
mm,
I'm secure enough with what I teach, I would say, go forth, try other teachers. If you like their style better than mine, I'm glad you found that. If you want to come back, that's also good. But just, yeah, giving freedom, being open. And even like I've done a good amount of capoeira as well, and sometimes it is a lot of that, like this style, our group is better than this group for this reason. And I was taking a class recently with a master who is also jiu-jitsu black belt, and it was just a refreshing kind of basically he said, this is why I teach this specific technique in a certain way based on my
mm.
experience. It's not wrong to do it another way, but I'm giving you a reason why I teach it the way I do. So that was just really cool to hear that from a master, because a lot of times you don't get that kind of perspective. You get it like, do it like this.
I appreciate I'm going to incorporate that into my own like state. That's really powerful as like for me as a student to hear that. Like I have the room to question, but also this is just, I'm going to show you because we do want to be shown, right? And
Yeah, it should
striking
have
that
a reason.
balance.
And I understand from both sides, but yeah, as an adult, you have to question. You have to, this idea that as a child, you're already hardwired to learn. So kids can learn things without consciously trying to learn it or without consciously understanding it. Adults can, but it's a lot more rare. And a lot of times you're going to have to go through a good amount of conscious learning before it can shift its way into that subconscious.
Yeah. And, so coming back to like, I having options, right? When we're talking about like the problem in the fitness and movement world of self-righteousness, what do we mean by self-righteousness? I was just kind of curious, like, I know it's a big thing, but I think it's nice to unpack it.
I guess there's a quote from Dune, something about like, I love Dune quotes,
Oh,
something about
dude,
like
so
a
good.
good leader has to have a sense of the sardonic because people are going to elevate them to God status and they have to keep a
Mm.
level head because if they let themselves believe their own myth, then that's when it gets out of control. I'm going to see if I can, it's going to take too long to find. I'll have to find it later.
Keep talking. I'm going to search for it. I'm going to
Yeah,
search the.
I know it's a sense of the sardonic is in there, but yeah, so I think it's, and sometimes you get to this level of when you're elevated on social media and then you get people constantly kissing your ass and telling you how great you are, that you stop questioning yourself and then you start to believe this mythos of, I am not a man, I am a god. Follow
Yeah.
my way and you will become also a god just like me. So I think it's important to still be able to make fun of yourself, to laugh. Now there's the other side of that, because they say, oh, I'm showing you my fails, I'm so authentic. I can be fake by intentionally showing you my fails to try to prove my authenticity. So it goes both ways in that sense. But
hmm
yeah, you just have to realize that nobody is flawless. And then when we get into teaching as a teacher, it's like, again, what are you after? Some teachers like to have that power. Like some
hmm
teachers maybe they'll intentionally give students a hard workout that they know they can't follow to show like, wow, look at how hard this is. Okay. And sometimes that's a lesson. Um, but yeah, there's that certain amount of, I guess, power that comes with teaching, and you have to be able to shut down the power, shut down the ego, and say like, how can I help people learn stuff?
as you're just saying that, that is a recent lesson for me. I explored altered states of consciousness, and one of the messages that came in was, "Be careful what I do with power." And I had to like spend this whole year checking why I actually teach. And I think there was a huge streak of me actually getting high on the idea that, I could impart something so difficult and complex to people that made me special. And when I had to return to that root, I was like, it's because I actually felt very insecure about myself when I was a lot younger. And that's the root of why I got into this stuff. And that actually determined who I attracted, versus now it's like, I want you to have some options, but I am not the only way. And that actually, I'm like, I don't know how to sell that. But at the same time, it's sort of, I feel more at peace with myself, because what you're saying is very true. It's very easy to kind of like, it's like the dark side of the force in Star Wars, it's seductive. I found that quote. Do you want me to read it?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Greatness is a transitory experience. It is never consistent. It depends in part upon the myth, making imagination of humankind. The person who experiences greatness must have a feeling for the myth he is in. He must reflect what is projected upon him, and he must have a strong sense of the sardonic. This is what uncouples him from belief in his own pretensions. The sardonic is all that permits him to move within himself. Without this quality, even occasional greatness will destroy a man.
Brilliant. Because
That's
it's like people become the characters that they play on, on the internet when they go so far into it. And yeah, especially in the in the YouTube fitness world, like, hey guys, today I'm going to bring you the best exercise ever, the top 10 tips for getting swole. And then that gets millions of views, of course.
man, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but I definitely have had guys who I've known personally in the fitness world, and they blow up on YouTube. And I'm like, they are nothing like that in real life.
Yeah.
And that is not actually how they train. And I don't know how to, I don't want to be that kind of guy who's just like keyboard work. It's not worth my time.
Right, right.
But I'm like, and I see the clickbait items because I would have clickbaited it when I was, my mid 20s. I've been
Yeah.
like, yeah, I want to know how to get 10 pounds of muscle in 3 months, you know? But any practitioner who's been in long enough, like, that is not the important thing. It's not hurting yourself long enough to keep practicing, but you have to hurt yourself to find that.
Yeah, it's a and it's just interesting that that's kind of the path that I found myself going towards as well. Is more, I used to be so obsessed with I want to learn all these tricks and all these skills, and now it's like I want to be able to do this just for another 20, 30 years at least. And I don't want my supposed image to sacrifice my own health because I'm trying to live up to the image of who people might think I am on the internet. And yeah, it's the same idea. Like you said, not training what they post because their actual training might be completely different. Just nothing right or wrong. Just interesting thoughts.
Yeah, I don't want to point any fingers. I want to just like let people know that there is something more to than meets the eye. A lot of the stuff on those, because empowering yourself through movement practice, it can change you, it can transform you. Uh, and I think what we're kind of saying is like there's one way you can go, which is sort of like you can feed your own ego until it swells. And there's another way. And I was kind of curious, like, how did you observe this in yourself where you're like, oh, well, maybe I need to do this differently or practice movement differently for 20, 30 years?
I'm still observing it, and I'm just trying to be like, as objective as possible. And that it's hard to do, but really trying to just be honest with myself of what my intentions are, who I am, what my level is. Like I was saying, I got a comment today about like saying I shouldn't teach the things I fail at. Well, it's like, what's my standard? To some degree, I might fail at everything. To another degree, I can teach better than I can perform because I spent my first 5 years building bad habits that led to a different appreciation for what it is to learning stuff. At the same time, who am I trying to teach? I'm not necessarily trying to build Olympic athletes. I just want to help people, have fun with their training and build just a more broad perspective of what they think they understand about that kind of stuff. And just to, so I'm still figuring it out myself, what I observe, but I know that there comes with a lot of these skills, a certain elitism as well. And I've also been there because you judge based on what you know. So like maybe I would, I thought I knew about handstands, so I would watch a handstand performance and I would judge it by the handstands. And I would say like, okay, there was a bit of wobble there. That could have been better. Yeah, maybe it could have been better, but what about like the other 5 minutes of the act? What about the transitions? The handstands are the easy part. What about the stuff that you don't appreciate because all you know is the handstand part of it? And there's just so many layers of all of it that I'm still learning. I'm still trying to figure it out. But I'm just trying to be more honest with myself about my goals, about my intentions as a practitioner, as a teacher, and also trying to help people understand, like, why are you trying to learn this? I had a message recently as well about someone saying, like, they suffered from an overly elevated posture and asking, and no wrong questions. It's just interesting to see the thought process. And I thought like, well, if I train planche, because that involves scapular depression, if I get stronger in scapular depression, will that help fix my posture? And this idea is like, if you want to train planche, it should not be because you think it's going to fix your posture. It should be because you want to train planche because you think it's a cool skill, because that strength does have a certain carryover. But it's, again, just understanding the idea of why and being completely honest with yourself.
Yeah, no, I thank you for talking about it because um, I wanted to ask you about like learning fancy skills versus like general athleticism for adults. Like, because I think when we first get into this process, we don't really know the difference. Like when I was started with CrossFit, I was like, ooh, fancy stuff, but they're all skills, right? You can unpack at different rates, but I don't think I actually had general athleticism, which would allow me to do these things.
Yep. Yeah, so it's the same. Like I'm selling acrobatics, which sounds very intimidating, like fancy moves. But I tell
Mm,
most people like flips are cool. They're not going to make you a better person. They're not going to make you a better athlete, but they look really cool. Um, but at the very base, I think for general athleticism, like we're going to work on rolls and cartwheels because I think everyone can benefit from those basic moves. And if you want to take it further, there are a lot of options, and I can offer options, and a lot of other people can. But just yeah, just understanding the generalist approach, and it's like, how far do you want to take it? And from a general health perspective, learning basics of a lot of things helps just to give that better perspective. And then as you go further, it can be quite the opposite. It can be harmful. Like you can have harmful to your health. You can have a lot of fun learning cartwheels and rolls, and the potential for injury is fairly minimal. And then you say, okay, I want to take it into flips, and now we offer things that look cool, but there's a much greater risk. And then the question is, what are you doing it for? You're not a gymnast. You're not a
mm,
circus performer. If you're doing it for fun, cool. And then how far is it worth taking it? Like, do you want to take it so far that you're putting yourself at a greater injury risk? Maybe it is worth it. But it's an understanding to have. And it's like same thing with handstands. I think like basic handstand stuff, a lot of people can benefit from just for shoulder strength and mobility. And then
mhm,
how far do you want to take it? If you want to take it towards a one-arm handstand, you have to train a lot. And in that case, it takes a lot of time, a lot of dedication. You may not succeed. And the risk of injury is a lot greater just because of the volume that you have to put into it. So do you want to
mm.
do it? Is it worth it? It might be, but it's gone to that point where it becomes a skill specialty and less of a general. And like I said, just understanding why. Why are you trying to do it? What's the purpose? And be honest.
Yeah, the why, and also like that threshold of high risk, lower reward. Like because in the beginning, the basics just offer tons because there's so much carryover. You know, I realized that in Olympic lifting, after being able to do a body weight snatch is a much higher risk and lower reward. Like if you can snatch your own body weight, you understand physics a lot better. With lighter weights, you can do whatever you want, but with your own
Right.
body weight, you can't. And after that, though, the amount of volume, like you said, to practice, you got to be very tip top shape with like you almost have to have like monk like fitness or like practices where you're like, I'm not doing other stuff
Absolutely.
because if the healing rate of parts of my body is different, like, and I think that is sort of a tricky part when I encounter CrossFitters. Nothing bad. They've exposed our sport to so much, but explaining that to them and asking their why, it's been a challenge to actually get people this, admit what are they really doing something for and how much are they willing to risk.
Yeah. And then also, like, who are you doing it for is the second question. Are you doing it for other people, or are you doing it for yourself? And I asked myself that this was a parallel that I think like a year ago I had this thought. But I found it really interesting is that, do you do stuff so you can talk about it with other people, or do you actually do it for your own personal development? And if you didn't have the opportunity to share it, would you still care? Would you still do it? Like back before Netflix and all that, right? You would watch shows on a certain night of the week. And then, I remember in middle school, of course, the height of my social awkwardness, which lasted a very long time. There were a lot of shows, well, whatever, we watched our shows. I remember I watched certain shows that I didn't really like, that I didn't really care about that much, but I watched them because I knew it was a topic of conversation. So it's
Mm,
like I watched these shows exclusively so I could talk to other people about it and have a reason to talk, rather than I did it for myself because I like the characters, because I like the story. And there's nothing wrong with either. It's just, again, asking yourself that why. Like, do I train handstands so I can post cool photos on the internet? or do I train it so I can have a sort of physical meditation and different insight into my own physical practice? And it could be
Hmm.
both, but just it's that same theme of being honest.
Yeah. And as we're talking about honesty with the why, like, again, like in the fitness and movement world, for if nobody's asking these questions, shouldn't that be sort of like a red flag? Like, especially to people, like, I don't know, like there's just yeah, if we're not asking the whys, like I feel like that is sort of the barrier to development, is if we don't ask questions, or even as a teacher, or even asking other contemporaries, like if we're having this conversation and I'm like, oh, this is my actual why, then I've learned something. Then I
Yeah.
can talk about that. But I find that that is very much a taboo topic in the weightlifting world, at least. Have you found that to be in other movement worlds? Because
Um, it's a tough topic to approach for sure, because you just have to, and I'm still like formulating a lot of my own why, a lot of my own reasons. But it's like, okay, are you posting handstand photos? Has it become a business now? So let's say like, this is what I found in, again, I'm using the handstand world as an example. There's a lot of handstand teachers now, like everybody these days is a handstand teacher.
yeah,
So then here's the question. Are you doing handstands because you enjoy it, or are you doing it as a way to try to make money? Could be a bit of both. I know for me personally, as I started doing it as a business, it took away from the enjoyment. Like I used to do it just because I wanted this, because I thought it was cool. I wanted to do it for myself. And now because there's a pressure of making money from it, it actually detracts from my love for the skill. I still love it for a lot of reasons, but it detracts from that. So then it becomes, and then you have kind of a higher level of that where somebody posts a fake one arm handstand photo where they obviously didn't hold it. And then like, hey guys, check out my course. Don't you want to learn to do this?
oh god, yeah,
So, but then you have the other level of that where people who are very high level practitioners start to get into teaching, but they don't have any actual teaching experience.
hmm,
So then you're trying to kind of bridge the gap between someone who hasn't trained enough and is trying to teach, someone who has trained themselves too much and is trying to teach. And what was the question?
oh
Oh,
no, we're just
approaching why. Yeah,
yeah,
so then it becomes, yeah, do they ask themselves why? Um, and that's kind of my goal as I progress as a teacher, is trying to incite people to ask better questions. Because a
yeah.
good question is one that, so the worst kind of question for me is like, any tips? Because they haven't put in any thought, any research. They're just groping. That's like they're groping for this information. They don't even know me. They're already trying to touch my ass. Like, too
Haven't
much.
asked your name, haven't given you any offers for a
Yeah.
coffee or a food date.
Yeah. So it's like that idea. I want to incite people to ask better questions, because if I get a good question, they learn from the answer. I learn from how I had to answer it. So it's like, yeah, a good question is one that both parties benefit from.
Yeah, so like
You
say
have to
for
do research to ask a good question.
right, and actually that's interesting, because like say I was to like approach you and be like, hey Yuri, I don't plan on doing anything fancy with, I just want to be able to hold like a 10-second freestanding handstand, just because I think there's a lot of value in that poise, like just being able to hold something, to control it.
Right.
What kind of questions would you ask me, just knowing who I am, or just my general movement background? If I answered like truthfully, what would you like to ask me?
Well, the first thing, if somebody came to me like that, or they asked like, can you help me with this? I would say, show me, because that's gonna tell me way more than anything, because they might be telling me their own narrative. Because sometimes they might be like, well, I used to do martial arts and yoga and weightlifting, but then I had an injury, and it's all interesting to hear, but sometimes they're too caught up in their own narrative, and it's like, I want to
Mm,
see, show me what you're doing where you are. You want to learn a handstand, show me your best attempt. I don't care how shit it is. I don't care how
hmm.
much of it is a failure. Like, put your hands on the floor, put some weight into them, be safe, of course, And then I'll say, okay, so now we learned something. Now I kind of know how to approach it. Either it's fear, or we need to build up more strength and conditioning, or we just need to spend more time accumulating. But a lot of times, like if people come to me not as a student, just asking a random question, like, yeah, do the research first, because a lot of the things that they're asking, I've already talked about. So what I like one of the best questions, just as an example, a question that I liked a lot of is, hey, in this portion of your book, there was a cue that to me was not as clear as it could have been. Could you clarify that? So that was a good question, because I'm learning what I could have done better. I'm helping clarify something for them. And then that also helps the future generations of people who are reading it. So that's a question that benefits three potential parties. Whereas, can you give me some tips for press handstand? I would say, like, yeah, push in your shoulders, get your ass up in the air. General questions yield general answers.
Oh,
But then they would say, like, okay, can you help me with the press? Here's what I'm doing. Then I would say, okay, you need to do this, this, and this, because that's a specific weakness that you have. That's only helping one person. Potentially another person who is making the same mistakes, assuming they know how to catch in themselves the mistakes that they see. So any tips question helps nobody. Tips for me helps one person clarify this detail of the stuff that has already been out there. That's a question that helps three parties.
Man, that's fantastic, because that already, like, if we want to talk about combating the any kind of self-righteousness in the movement world, is to just think, what is this? How far is this going to go? This information, is this just me saying, I am master, I'm asserting that this one person who hears the info, they're like, great, but future generations, if somebody reading something is like, oh, that's what he meant by that in this second edition of the book or something.
Yeah.
Man, that kind of just blew my mind a little bit about, like, because I get the same question. Any tips on, front squats? And I'm like,
yeah, like so many tips. Let's be more specific, and then let's be specific to the point that it can be an educational approach for others, not just for the person asking.
Man, that is a really good. And so, is that something you've been kind of chewing on? Just, you have a lot of visibility now, so I'm sure you get a lot of those questions. Any tips?
Yeah, so it's like, ask better questions. That's my number one tip. No, but I think of myself as a student too. So I'm doing my best. I try to take a lot of classes and workshops, and I do my best to not be who I am, but not like, I'm not going to go to a workshop and do handstands in the warm up because I want people to know that I'm good at handstands. And I've been there. I have done that. Like dance classes, for example, like, okay, well, I'm a shitty dancer. At least if I show everybody that I can do a handstand, they won't think of me. Or for myself, like, I need to know that I can at least do something reasonably well, because I know I'm going to fail at the subject matter. So like, and I'm trying to attend classes without that kind of mindset, saying like, I'm not here as Yuri, the handstand, whatever, international guru. I'm here as Yuri, the student. I'm not here to teach or show off handstands. I'm not introducing myself as that. I just want to learn somebody else's perspective. But I try to observe. I actually go to classes so I can observe the teaching methods and how other students respond, just as much as learning the stuff itself. But I'm normally very quiet. I don't really ask a lot of questions. I try to kind of let people talk. And then I try to be very conscious of the question that I'm asking is one that benefits other people and not just myself. Because that's shit that you have to ask in private, right? In a group setting. Because I get a lot of those questions like, oh, what about me? What do you think about this method? What do you think about this? Like, so-and-so does this. Well, like, okay, cool. We don't need to compare it. But it's, yeah, that idea of, for me as a student, I'm only going to ask questions in front of the group that I know will benefit the understanding of other people who may not have thought of that yet.
Yeah, it's like almost like the person who's not afraid to ask a quote unquote dumb question that everyone is kind of thinking about, but it's actually a thoughtful question, right? Like, what did this teacher mean by this word? Like when someone says like intention, right? And you're like, teacher, can you clarify what that means? Because we all have a different definition of that word.
Because that's the other thing I get into, is this idea of the assumption of context. So as a teacher, I have to know my students, right? if I'm teaching a group who I know have read my book, I can give certain exercises and certain cues. If I'm teaching a group of people who have never heard of me and they're just there to have fun for the day, I have to approach that very differently. So you'll get that, like, capoeira or a lot of martial arts is a good example where they have their own language. And it's what I mentioned before. It's like, how can you teach to someone who understands the context versus someone who doesn't understand it? How can you show it to them in a way that they can still enjoy it? Or like with so I was watching The Witcher last night, and so it's a Netflix adaptation of books, and of course it's another thought. How can they approach and project this in a way where the fans of the books who know all of the details of the stories still enjoy it, but at the same time people who don't have any context, who, like, I don't know who Geralt is, can they still enjoy the show as well? And it's that idea of potentially having both of those types in the same class. How do you adjust your content so that both of those people can appreciate it?
Man, you're hitting the nail on the head, because that is really important. Like you said, not assuming the context. Like, some people being like, I don't know, this is just cool, I just want to see it, and like, this just seemed interesting, versus people are like, no, I am a sincere student, I'm here to like push my edges. And sometimes they end up in the same classroom. And
for sure. And for the most part, I try to be more of the beginner. Like, if I know that I'm taking a class, I try to specifically not do research. Like, I try to not do research of that workshop, of what they post, because that's like, what if I come in there with no knowledge? How good are they at showing that to someone who maybe doesn't know, who doesn't have that context? Or do they assume that everybody who's coming to the event has already read up on that context?
yeah, like almost as if like teachers were going in like secret shoppers. They have those people who go into businesses as disguised
Right.
consumers. It's sort of like, that is a smart move, I think, when you're talking about, because then you have no knowledge and you're not affected by their image. And then you kind of just like, what do they say to the absolute beginner? Do they talk that language?
No, for sure. Because on the other side of that, then you have the full-on like cult indoctrination, where no matter what the leader says, it's gospel, it's word, it's the word of God. And then like, so I've been to a few workshops like that as well, where it was kind of that cult vibe, where it's like, oh, one time our supreme leader did this. Like, well, what are you doing now and why? And it can go, it's good to have a context because you can get further as a student, but then again, you still have to question, because then it can go to that point of the indoctrination.
Yes. And
where they do something only because they were told to by the leader.
Oh man, I see. I thought it was just a thing in the weightlifting world, but it's sort of like this kind of the way we are as humans. Yeah. Like, sometimes we just want to have everything dropped in and downloaded.
And we start to believe that narrative. So another really interesting kind of parallel, I was visiting a friend in Australia, and he does a lot of different martial arts, and he's been getting into judo, and he said he took a random Aikido class at some college, and they were doing, I don't do Aikido, so I don't know, whatever, like the touch hands thing. And then the guy was doing some kind of movement, and they said, like, bro, is there a problem? It's like, what do you mean? Like, you're supposed to fall when I do this. So it's like, you're supposed to make me fall. Like, physics doesn't work like that. So it's this idea that, like, sometimes and that's what happens a lot of times with that master and then the black belts, is that the white belts are more dangerous than the black belts, because the black belts are conditioned to fall a certain way to the point that they believe it. So then you have those touchless martial arts where the students have been with the master so long that he goes like this and they fall. And of course it doesn't work on a beginner because they haven't been indoctrinated into that method.
Oh God, that's such a perfect example. And I hear that a lot actually in the jiu-jitsu world, that the white belts are scary because they flail.
Yeah.
And so many people have been doing rote moves as blue and brown belts, and they're like, I don't know what the hell to do. But that's real. Like, that flail, somebody's going to be freaked out. Yeah. And
it's the same like with Capoeira, for example, as well. Like, it's a very specific language and communication. And sometimes when you speak it so well, like, you kind of know how people react. And then you get a beginner, you don't know how they're going to react. And a lot of times it's the beginner that like surprises you and throws a kick out of nowhere because they don't know where to throw the kick from. And it's interesting thing too, you know, sometimes you do like demonstrations where let's say I'm the highest belt and the teacher wants to do a demonstration on me. He would like throw something and then I react naturally. He'd be like, no, you're supposed to react like this. Like, am I? I don't know. I didn't. So what does that tell both of us? Maybe I'm supposed to react that way if I had read your mind and I was properly indoctrinated. And martial arts is a big one like that, because then you get into that, like fighting is not pretty, like real fighting. It's not pretty. It's unpredictable. It likely both sides are going to get hurt no matter what. But then you kind of approach like, oh, well, because I can do these and I have fast hands, now I'm the good guy and you're the bad guy. And now I can do this without getting hurt. And it's, yeah, martial arts is a big one like that when it comes to the indoctrination of people do one thing for so long, they start to believe it.
Man.
And I mean, you can see that, you know, like those videos of the, drunken Kung Fu master versus MMA, like, not saying that they don't have skill, but the guy who's actually been in real fights is probably going to do better in a real fight.
Right. Because there's like, I guess there's learning a skill in captivity, right? Like the sport is a very unsafe, like actually I'll take like competitive lifting, the sport of weightlifting. There's specific rules, but I've seen beginners with incredible raw strength do the worst atrocious technique, but their body's reflexes to keep them safe and balanced help them do these magnificent, like they don't look technically sound as lifts, but I'm like, fuck, they got it done with no instruction on my part.
And then someone's going to say it's wrong. And it's like, well, is it wrong? I don't know. They got the weight up. It's the same thing like with handstand, for example. You know, everybody is obsessed now with a straight line. Like it has to be this. Don't ever do banana back handstands. It's wrong. Like, is it wrong? You're doing a handstand. If it hurts you to do it that way, then yes, definitely that's a good note that it's wrong. But it's like, why is it right or wrong? Because that's how gymnasts do it now. Gymnasts didn't even used to do it that way. So again, you just have to ask those questions of why. Why is it wrong? And I can give a specific reason why it would be wrong, but that comes with a very specific set of rules.
Yeah, like a context. Like if we're doing it for that, like a photo, right? Like because you want it to look perfectly balanced, like equilibrium versus like you're just doing it for fun because, you know, when kids just want to get upside down, they don't ever ask, what's the proper form? They're just like, ah.
Yeah, and yeah, it's another interesting, like I was at Bondi Beach and I saw some kids doing cartwheels and I love how they just do it without having expectation, without caring. They don't know it's right or wrong. They just do it. And then they learn something through that. But but it's easy thing to sell, right versus wrong. Right? Like, have you been struggling with your banana back handstand? Well, here are 10 of the top tips to get your handstand straight so that you can never do a banana back again. And it's like, why? Like, there's a photo of Sean Connery doing a handstand on the set of Dr. No, and he's got, you know, bent elbows and his back is arched, and like, go tell Sean Connery that his handstand is wrong. Go tell him to engage his glutes and his abs because his pelvis is not posterior tilted.
Your hip flexors are too tight, Sean Connery. They're not tilting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I used to think that way too. So it's not like I'm not exempt from that. I used to have a very clear, like, okay, this is what it's supposed to be. And that's what I'm training myself and others on. And again, maybe that's like, if you're training high level gymnasts, yes, it's important to have that standard. But if you're teaching just adults who want to have fun, or like this idea, like there's some school of thought that says, I'm not going to name names, that you have to do, you know, like shoulder width dislocates and all this other stupid shit for shoulder mobility before you're even ready to do a handstand. And it's like some people will never be able to get their shoulders open. That's just their structure. Are you going to tell them that they can't do a handstand? Like, or are you going to find a way to make a compensation? And of course, it's on the other side of that, someone who can only lift their arms up to here, then yeah, probably handstand shouldn't be their top priority. But it's, yeah, this idea of why do you set these rules? Why do you put yourself in this prison? Like, you want to do a handstand. You're going to fail. Find out how you fail. Find out how to work on your weaknesses to do better. You know, get a teacher. But It's good both ways. I think it's good to have both. It's good to have a set standard and a set direction, but at the same time, understanding that you don't need to follow the standard to enjoy yourself necessarily or to do it correctly.
Wow, as you're saying that, like there's been this kind of thread as we're talking, like, you questioning, like, why are you doing this? Who are you doing it for? But you mentioned the personal narrative versus the actual skill display. Like, what do you just know cold? Like that,
Some
that's
people want to
important.
tell a story before they do their thing, which is like, that's what I notice. I
Mm,
always have like, not always, but I'll have like one of those types in most workshops where they have a story to tell and they want to tell the story before they do a handstand. It's like, I'm going to learn more about your story if I just watch you do a handstand than you telling. But I think sometimes that's part of the excuse. Like I want to say that, and I have as well, like I'm going to give excuses as to why I could have been better. Like, okay, I have some issues with my left hand, and and I've had some injuries because of that, and that's part of the reason why my left side handstand isn't as strong. And I was self-taught, so I'm not as good. And I have my own personal narrative. But then if I just break it down, like, who am I trying to prove myself to? I've come a
yeah.
long way. I'm still improving in different facets. So why do I have to have a story to tell other people when it's not about that?
Yeah, I can remember having a narrative too. Like, I had a lot to prove, and through a lot of inner, questioning, I was like, I actually wanted my dad to just notice me, like, be like, "Hey, that's cool. You're doing manly stuff." And I'm like, "Wow, that's a powerfully and simple," but also like just took me out of. I'm like, "Oh, I was." The enjoyment factor is separate from trying to prove myself. Like there's these standards where I have to just be recognized, and versus like I just do it because it's fun. That reversion back to that, like, because I don't know, I guess I just made a name for myself as a teacher where I have the answers, and now I'm like, actually I don't, and I don't. I'm trying to convey that energetically, and this is why we're having this conversation, because I do need to know about my students better, you know, and they all have a
I'm
narrative too.
Yeah, I wrote something recently, like to some degree, that I'm trying to people who pay me that think I have the answers. I'm trying to convince them that nobody has the answers, and that's my job description now.
That is exactly why I must have scanned that in your social media somehow. You're like, dude, I have to ask this guy, you know, um, because you've demonstrated your skills, your teaching ability, but also these questions are so important, because if I have people to forward to you, I will,
Yeah,
definitely
for
do that.
sure.
And I would like to come out to Vegas at some point and
Yeah,
just expose myself to the
and I
environment.
know I'm hitting that point as well because that's what you don't realize about the traveling life. It's like I don't really get to train. I'm not in top shape when I travel because I'm not spending that time training. So then it's like this idea that what I mentioned before, like, oh, I want to go to the workshop to see someone do cool shit. I don't want people to go to my workshop for that reason and not be disappointed when I'm not at the top of my athleticism because I've been traveling. So it's
Mm,
like I understand to some degree, like, oh, I've never seen a one-arm handstand before, but I don't want that to be the reason people go, is just to see someone do a trick. Because you can go to the circus for that, and the tricks are going to be a lot better than anything I can do.
yeah. Well, that's actually a good point. There's always someone who's going to be in that performance shape that is their job, and they stay there. They stay in tip top shape because they need to protect themselves from the volume of the performance, because that's intense stuff. Just doing that in front of people. I, I mean, I can't even. I can only imagine the kind of unconscious competence that they need to do that.
It's and like it's funny how much more energy it takes doing the same act, the same routine. You do it in your
Mm.
room, you do it in front of a group of people. It's like the amount the energy demands are, I don't even, they've multiplied so much more. And I mean, eventually you do it so much that you become completely calm in front of a crowd, but it's always, you get that adrenaline. Like
Mm.
hand balancing, especially, is one of those that you have to really appreciate the people that perform it, because it's like what happens, you get nervous, you get a little bit more shaky, so that the idea of maintaining equilibrium becomes even more difficult. But at the
Hmm.
same time, again, it's a different skill. So it's like, what do you spend your time doing? If you spent your time training and performing, then you're a very good practitioner and a performer. But if you break out to become a teacher and you haven't spent time teaching, it's a different skill set.
Hmm.
And
Have you?
it's like, so this other idea, again, I'm not trying to be negative by any means. So really good workshop that I took earlier this year was on, it was like stunt choreography, stunt fighting,
Hmm.
and which is a very physical art. It's a very physical practice. And that workshop, what I really liked about it, it was pure technical. There was nothing physical about it. Nobody broke a sweat. Everything was done slow because it was about improving technique and perspective. And it's like, yeah, I can go sweat on my own time, compared to, let's say, like, again, some people, whatever, they teach their handstand workshops and they say, okay, we're going to do hollow body holds for 5 minutes. We're going to do 100 pike ups because that's what I do in my routine. It's like, or same thing. I've taken, at one point a capoeira workshop from a master, and it was like, okay, you're going to do 30 jump squats and then 50 kicks. And it's like, cool. I understand the importance of conditioning and in a martial art, how important that is. But if I'm taking a workshop once from a master, like, I would rather see some deeper insights into the technique that's indicative of their experience rather than a fitness workout. So it's, I don't know what the question was that I answered like that, but I think that's another really important thing to think about is like, if they're taking a workshop, do I want to kill them with training?
Hmm.
And it's, yeah, that idea. So I really enjoyed that stunt workshop because there was nothing physical about it. But coming out of that, I had a better understanding of certain concepts that I didn't even know. And that after that workshop, I appreciate a lot differently when I'm watching a fight on screen. And it's
Hmm.
just another thought is, how do we separate the physical from the technical elements? I'm not sure what the question was and why I went that direction, but
No, you know
it's a
what? You
thought that I
got to
had.
the meat of how do you combat self-righteousness in the
Right.
movement world, which is you give people not just don't kill them with a workout, like give them the underpinnings of that, your collected learnings over the years into something that they can't get they're not spending time with you,
Yep.
right? Like trying to
Yeah, for
grab
sure.
something when you're
So the
traveling.
the best workshops that I've taken, I've been to a lot, and I'm still taking more, were ones that permanently changed my perspective of how I saw that subject. Either it was something new that I like never even thought about, or it was just a new detail that it exposed another layer of vision that I had not developed yet. It's like, okay, now I can see ultraviolet. Now I can see the magnetic field that goes behind it. And those
Yes.
workshops, they stay with you permanently. So there nothing wrong with a one-time experience. Like, yeah, I had fun. We did a bunch of sit-ups. I'm really sore. Like, my shoulder's going to be sore for a few days. And it was really cool to watch this dude do one-arm handstands for 3 hours. Amazing. And I got spotted a couple times. Versus, like, there were details that I didn't realize that I should be thinking about. And now when I train and when I go into my own practice and when I observe others, it opened up a new layer of vision and awareness that I didn't have before. And that's a permanent change from one class.
So I guess I'll have to come through one of your workshops or spend some time with you, because that, like, I love what you said, seeing like this ultraviolet, like infrared, like this layer of light that you've never seen about something, and you just like, you can't unsee it. Those are the moments where I'm like,
Yeah.
damn,
So, like, I'm going to use hand balancing as another example, right? For years, I was so focused on the skills, like, this is what it has to be. And like I said, I watched a performance and I judged it based on the handstands. Or, for example, I hadn't taken dance classes yet, but I was doing flips. So I would watch a dance number and I would see a couple flips and be like, well, those flips weren't that good. Like, yeah, it's because they're fucking dancers who learned how to do flips in the few minutes of complex choreography and skill. So it's like appreciating the stuff that I didn't see before. And for example,
mm,
now when I watch a circus performance, because I've seen a lot, I have a fairly, good knowledge of the skills. Not still learning more, of course, but now I look at the transitions. Now it's not like I watched the Curios show in Sydney, and it wasn't the tricks that impressed me. It was the transitions that I looked at, was how they moved from one act to another, how they did something, instead of watching the guy put on his safety cable, they went dark and then a clown went out and did this interesting thing. So it's like those subtle details within the transitions that made the tricks look smooth. And that's to me is I guess what I've been getting at more in my own practice is less of the macro and more of the micro, just understanding those subtle details that you never even knew existed. Like most people are going to see the one-arm handstand and go, wow, that's a cool trick. I see the way he set that up to bring the audience into the drama of potentially falling out of the one-arm handstand, even though that wasn't something that was going to happen, but he made it look a certain way that brought the audience into it. And that's a subtle detail. And that the audience appreciated that handstand a lot more because he pretended to fall rather than just going into a trick that he obviously can do in his sleep.
Man.
So it's just, details, layers, a lot of layers.
Well, for anybody listening, I mean, it sounds like this is what people can, at least just seeing a different color coming to your workshops, like, I
know that the best thing that I try to do, if I see that somebody has already ability, I don't want to validate their ability, if that makes sense. So I would rather, and then for me as well, I don't want to go to a workshop to do what I can already do, because why am I there? I'm not learning anything by doing what I can do. I want to be awkward in trying to do what I can't. So it's the same idea. If I try to see that people are gymnasts, for example, I'm going to give them cues that question and oppose gymnastics because I know they already have enough experience. But I might use more of a gymnastics-oriented method to certain beginners who don't have exposure to that. So I think I know I don't always succeed. There's never a 100% success rate, but I try to do my best to hopefully through my experience expose people to a perspective that maybe they haven't encountered before.
I like that. Awkward at what I can't do, not validate what I already can. I get that. There's definitely like a nice ego boost when you're like, yeah, this expert affirmed, like, you look good, man.
Yeah, and I've been there, and I feel like sometimes that's why people go to lessons. It's not to get feedback or learn. Sometimes it's to get validation for what they think is already good. But at the same time, as a teacher, I don't want to be a dick and just call everybody shit because I'm the teacher and I have that power. So it's a balance between the two. I don't want to tell people they're shit to make myself feel better, but I don't want to tell them they're great and validate what they're doing because they're also not learning and I might be feeding their ego.
Spoken like a true teacher, man. Yeah. Don't give them too much. Don't give them too little. It just,
because I've been there. Like I know, just looking back on more of my own experience as a teacher for a while, right? Especially when I was really into gymnastics. I was coaching kids at the time, and I watched a lot of YouTube videos. I was coaching a lot. I did a lot of additional research because I was really into it. And at one point, and I caught this, not then, but I caught it more recently now, is someone would do a skill and then I would list like everything, the 8 things I noticed that they could have done better. Like, yeah, that was cool, but you have to do this, 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 and this. And it's like, who am I trying to help? That's not helping them. They can't focus on all those things at once. That's helping me. That was for my own ego. I'm trying to show other people that I have such a sharp eye that I can notice all these things. But is that actually helping the students that I teach? Not really. So it was, and I'm just, again, I have that thought now because now I might notice those same 8 things. And what I'm going to do is try to give them the 1 or 2 things that may fix the other ones. Or sometimes maybe even not say anything. It's hard for me as a teacher to not say something, but sometimes I just want to see what happens a few more times before, because what if they figure it out on themselves? What if they figure it out and I didn't have to show them how to? That's valuable for them.
Yeah, man, as you're saying that, I can remember the first time like someone was like, I watched a better coach than me, just like, I got nothing for you. And like the student's looking like, give me feedback, coach. And he's like, I got nothing for you. And they're like, well, yes, there's something. And I'm like, do it more.
Yeah. Sometimes you just have to do it. And sometimes it's like, that's what I caught as well. Sometimes, okay, you learn a skill. You're not ready yet for more feedback. Like, go do it a couple hundred more times. And then after you develop more of that awareness, maybe then you'll be ready for more feedback. And it's like sometimes it's counterproductive to give feedback at the wrong time as well.
Man. Well, and speaking of this stuff, like, do you offer this to your online coaching people or any of your other offerings? Like, because
I offer philosophical insight on how to
yes,
teach.
do you? Because I mean,
not really. Because I'm really particular, and I know there's a lot of teacher trainings out there, and I don't want to go that route. Maybe if I get low on money, then I'll have to. For now, I'm doing okay. This idea that like, oh, you're going to spend a weekend with me, or even more, even whatever, 200 hours, and then you're certified in teaching this.
Mm-hmm.
So I took a weekend workshop recently. It was 3 days, and now I'm certified in teaching that method, whatever. And like my thoughts at the end of it were like, well, I have more questions than answers. Like, I don't feel okay teaching this. Maybe in a few months or more when I've had time with the material and with my own teaching cycle. So I would like to, but I want to do it right, and I haven't figured out a way to do it right yet. So if somebody wants to schedule a Skype consult to talk about teaching philosophies, we can definitely do that. But I'm definitely not offering teacher trainings until I can find a way to do it that's within my own bounds of integrity for now.
Man. No, that's fantastic. Stating what you're willing and not willing to do, not just be like, oh, because the next progression is like, on the way to being a personality or, but do you have any workshops coming up in Vegas or anything coming up?
I have one coming up in Vegas, but it's a small group and there's currently no spaces left. But I'm going to be doing more in Vegas. So this is my general plan right now. Right now, workshops I have coming up are in Brussels, Budapest, New York, then maybe Mexico. I'm still working that out. Then in Asia, I go to Bali and Singapore. And then I'll probably do another Euro trip either in the spring or the summer. And then I think it's good that I'm saying this now so then I can try to hold to my word. I think I want to take at least 6 months, maybe a year or more off international travel. So in that case, what I'm going to try to do is maybe host a workshop in Vegas every month or two. And then I can do different topics. So yeah, I think starting in the summer, maybe I'll do some stuff in North America, but I'm going to really severely limit my travel, at least for a year or so, just because like I need to chill and work on my own shit.
Take care of your own practice.
Do that. Yeah, it's hard to do that when I'm all over the place. And it's like my projects, they progress so slowly and my own training progresses so slowly because of what my schedule is like.
Right on. Well, that's good for me to know, and also the audience or anybody listening, because you do want to keep your own joy, like you were saying, for just your own fire, right? For doing all this stuff, your own practice, the things that keep you questioning, keep you inching forward and expanding.
And for sure. And I do love teaching workshops. It's just that the traveling part of it makes it so difficult. And it's like, I know when I do a tour, I kind of I've been better about it now because I've had to change my thought process and approach, but there's like this point of apathy. Like there's this point into the tour where it's like a lot of things that I normally care about, I just stop caring about. And it could be like training, it could be diet, it could be a lot of things. And then my mindset goes a little bit towards the negative side more than I'd like it to.
Yeah, there's not as much return on, like you hit that edge where you're like, okay, I'm done. I want to go home. I want to go home.
Yeah.
Well, just wrapping up, is there anywhere people can find you besides social media? Do you have a website or anything?
I have a website, so www.yuri-mar.com. It's a simple website, but it has some basic information. You can reach me easily through messaging or email. I don't have a team, so you're going to get me directly if you have any inquiries into whatever workshops or coaching or other services. And I have like an ebook and stuff on handstands that I sell, some instructional videos, working on more.
Nice. Well, maybe
website and social media.
Mm-hmm. Maybe people can hit you up for a consultation on teaching philosophy because, if there's not a lot being offered, sounds like you might have something to offer people.
Yeah. Interesting thought for sure.
Well, thanks again, Yuri. I
Yeah, thanks for having me.
appreciate, I hope this gets into the right hands. I don't know how, but we will, help people question a lot of the self-righteousness in the
Yeah,
fitness world
definitely. We
by
have to.
asking better questions and quoting Dune and go read The Witcher.
Yes, read The Witcher, read Dune. At least read the first and God Emperor of Dune, and then God Emperor has a lot of good quotes, and I like the idea that he just turns into a giant worm who's the god of all creation.
Frank Herbert, man.
Yeah, and then
Man ahead of his time.
after God Emperor, it kind of went downhill, but that's what it is. Well, you can't top that. You can't top a giant worm man who sees the future.
That's pretty much the end of sci-fi. Like that, you can't expand
Yeah,
it anymore into the
yeah, that's the top
storyline.
level.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Yuri.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thank you again for everyone who's listening. And please, I'll put the information in whatever form we can so that you can reach out and continue questioning. Guys, just continue questioning.
Always.
All right. Thank you.
Yep, cool.